In today's episode, I want to continue the conversation we started last week about taking the summer off your business and go a bit deeper into something that I think so many business owners quietly worry about when doing this. And that's how to actually handle client expectations when you are taking time off. Because it's one thing deciding that you want a slower summer or even a full break from your business, but it's another thing entirely trying to manage how that impacts clients, customers, or members without feeling guilty or like you're letting people down. And I think this is where a lot of women especially get stuck. Not because they don't want the time off, but because they're carrying this fear of what people will think or do if they're not available in the same way. So in today's episode, I want to walk you through how I approach this in my own business, how I communicate it clearly, and how I set expectations in a way that feels calm, professional, and actually really respectful on both sides. But before we dive in, if you are new here, hi, I am your host, Becky. I am a multi-award-winning business owner and the dreamer behind the Boss Your Socials Club. I created this podcast to help women like you simplify your life and grow a business on your terms without the overwhelm. So if you are ready for some no BS advice, practical tips, and honest chats that make business and life feel lighter and more doable, then you are in exactly the right place. Right then, let's get started with this week's episode. I think a good place to start, and I guess the first thing to say here, is that client expectations are rarely ever the problem. And when I say client, that could mean members or customers or whatever it might be. But I honestly think their expectations are rarely the problem. It's actually unclear communication that creates most of the stress. Because when people don't know what to expect from you, they fill in the gaps themselves. And usually they assume the worst case scenario, not the reality. Or they just assume standard service and not your slower summer or wherever it might be because it hasn't been communicated. And actually, when you think about it, that's quite fair because they don't know what they don't know and they're not mind readers. They shouldn't just assume you're off over the summer. So yeah, I honestly think that unclear communication is what creates most of the stress. So the goal with taking time off isn't to over-explain everything or justify why you're taking time off. It's simply to make things really clear as early as possible. I always start this process towards the end of June, sometimes even earlier. I start to map out exactly what my summer is going to look like, which I spoke about in the last episode, and I will link to that in the show notes. And then I communicate it in layers. So there are three main areas I think about. The first one is availability. When am I actually working and when am I not? The second is response times. So even if I'm technically off, what does that mean in reality? Am I checking emails once a week? Am I fully offline? Am I just slower to reply? I get really clear on that because some summers I am completely off and I don't check emails or anything. But often I quite like to check in one day a week just so that I'm not coming back to hundreds of emails and I can keep that under control. So yeah, I need to basically decide what my response times are and how that is communicated to the people who need to know. And the third is expectations around delivery. So if I've got ongoing client work, which I've had in previous summers, I don't tend to have so much now, but I have had that in previous summers, or membership content, what is happening when, how and when does it need to happen? Because what people don't need is constant access to you, however much we tell ourselves that they do. What they do need is certainty. They need to know what is happening, when it's happening, and how it affects them. So in my own business, I tend to communicate this really clearly in advance, and I keep it very simple. I'll usually send one main email or message that says something like, here's what my summer looks like, here's when I'm available, and here's what you can expect, and when I'm going to reply or if I'm going to reply. And something really important I've learned over the years is that most people are actually completely fine with it. In fact, a lot of clients and members really respect it because they also want balance in their own lives. And I think it sets an example that it's actually okay to do. I've actually had a member say to me in feedback forms before that the way that I structure August doesn't really work for her because she doesn't take the summer off. However, she really respects the fact that I do it because it is clearly advocating boundaries. And that is something she respects. And she just works around that because the rest of the year works for her. So I honestly think the anxiety around it is usually far bigger in our own heads than it is in reality. One thing I do want to say here is how important it is to set those expectations before summer actually starts. So don't tell people like the day before you go off, or as far as you can, don't tell people even just in the middle of July when you're half in holiday mode, but properly in advance. Like, give them notice when you still have capacity to think clearly and you still have capacity to plan and possibly tweak things if you need to. Because if you leave it too late, you end up trying to make decisions from a place of stress rather than from intention. And that's usually where things start to feel really messy. Another thing I find really helpful is being really specific with boundaries rather than vague and hoping that people know what I mean. So instead of saying I'll be slower to reply over the summer, I might say something like, I will check my emails once a week on a Wednesday, and that's when you're most likely to hear from me. Or I'll say something like, I'm not actively working between these dates, but I will be back on X date, and that is when you will most likely hear back from me. Because clarity removes any kind of anxiety for both you and the people you work with. And then there's something really important I want to add here, especially if you offer ongoing support like I do with my membership. And I want this to sort of be a reminder to you and maybe even a permission slip. I want you to know that you are allowed to design your business in a way that works for your life. You're allowed to communicate working patterns that support your capacity, and you are allowed to take time off without it needing to be justified or softened or made smaller. Now, practically speaking, there are a few things I always recommend doing before summer, specifically around client expectations. So one is updating anything that sets expectations automatically. So whether that's onboarding emails, welcome guides or pin messages or out of offices, whatever it is, make sure it's updated and reflects what you actually want it to communicate. Another is proactively communicating key dates before people have to ask you. And another is checking in with clients individually if you have ongoing work, just to make sure that you're both aligned on timing and delivery over the summer period. Because it might be that you are taking holiday one week and they're taking holiday the following week. And you need to know on both sides what to expect. So it can be asking them if you need to know when they're going to be off too. Finally, I suggest giving people a way to contact you whilst you're off so that they don't need to wait for you to be back and forget the thing that they needed to ask. Because I think that's the biggest thing. People should be able to contact you whenever they want to, but that doesn't mean you should have to reply straight away. By giving them a way to contact you, they get it off their to-do list and their mental load, and you can deal with it when you are back. And that might be 3 weeks later, but that doesn't matter if you have managed that expectation. So this could be an email. It could be a specific email address you set up so that you can go straight to that when you get back. And that's what you can deal with and prioritize straight away. Or it could be something like I do with my members where they can pre-submit any questions that they have through a form. And all of that comes into my Asana. And then I can just check there first when I get back and get back to anybody that has any questions and make them my priority. Like I said, this means that they can ask it straight away when it's on their mind, and I don't look at it until I'm back. So it doesn't stop me switching off or enjoying my break, but it also doesn't mean that they get frustrated because they're like, oh, I've got to wait until she's back until I can ask this thing. Honestly, I think most issues don't come from the boundaries themselves, they come from assumptions. What I really want you to take from this episode is that managing client expectations is not about being always on or making yourself constantly available. It's actually about being really clear, really early, and really consistent. So that way people feel valued even when you're not actively working in your business every day. And you get to actually step back without carrying that low-level stress of wondering what's happening while you are not there. Because that's the thing that really drains you, not the boundaries themselves, but the lack of them. So if you take anything from today, let it be this. Clear communication is what allows you to rest properly, and boundaries are absolutely okay. They just need to be clearly communicated. I'm just going to recap on what I've recommended across this episode. So if you've been nodding along but not taking notes, you can make a little note of them now if you want to. So the first thing is decide your summer availability clearly when you are and aren't working. Then set expectations around response times. Be specific about this and not vague. Communicate delivery timelines for any ongoing work you might have. Share your summer plans as early as possible. Ideally, I would say beginning of June or earlier, but this obviously really depends on when you're going off, but try and do it as early as possible. Use clear, simple messaging rather than over-explaining. Update automated emails, onboarding sequences, or welcome messages and things like that. Check in with ongoing clients before summer begins. Be consistent in how you communicate boundaries across all platforms. Remember that clarity reduces anxiety for both you and your clients. And most importantly, remind yourself that setting expectations isn't about pushing people away. It's about creating a business that can actually support your life, not take over it. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am honestly so grateful you choose to spend your time here. Before you go though, if you love this podcast and you're a woman running a small business who wants to make social media easier and business life less lonely, I have got something for you. The Boss Your Socials Club is here to bring you inspiration, accountability, confidence, and community. It's a place where we ban the word should because we believe in bespoke advice that will work for you, your stage of life, and your business. You get a monthly content plan, ready-to-use templates, accountability and action sessions, a private members podcast, expert support, a brilliant community of women who get it, and so much more. It's like having a mini social media expert and a bunch of cheerleaders in your pocket so that you can show up with confidence without the overwhelm. Membership starts at just £14 a month, and there is different tiers depending on the level of support you want. Thank you so much again for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.